course, Bruno is next to get an Elite Four theme deck. As he is the second member you face, he is a man of punchers, kickers, and rock snakes. Unlike Lorelei, Bruno did receive a set of 6 cards due to his status as a Gen 2 Elite Four member as well, so he was included in the e-reader Versus series with some pretty nice looking clay modeled art. As far as in-game teams go, Bruno is probably the worst member of the Elite Four, as all of his Pokemon have super low special stats, so it's very easy to sweep his entire team with a single special attacker, especially if you've got something like Mr. Mime or Kadabra on your team. When converting Bruno's team to the TCG, you do have some standouts though. Onix, as I've said before, is one of the big basics that often gets overlooked, and Hitmonchan is one of the most revered cards in base set because of its Haymaker status. A lot of people have fond memories of that first edition base set Machamp that came with the starter set, so it's fun to have that included in here. And Hitmonlee is in here too, guys. Woo! Since all of these Pokemon translate into fighting type cards, it's pretty feasible to just have all of these Pokemon in the same deck. What does that look like? How does that play out? Let's see. Bruno uses doubles of Onix, so let's just go ahead and put a full playset in here because it is such a great Pokemon to start the game with. A 90 HP basic that can attack for 1 energy. Pretty damn good way to start the game. It's going to allow you to absorb a lot of damage before you can eventually retreat to the bench, and during all of that time that you're taking hits, you can set up all of your other Pokemon on the bench. Not that very much setup is needed, as Machop is just another Haymaker card that can deal 20 damage for 1 fighting energy, which again is really going to outpace every other deck that you're up against. That's why we've got another playset of that. Just Onix or Machop, either one, is a great way to start the game because you're going to start hitting your opponent pretty hard early on. And of course you will be evolving into Machoke at some point. Only a couple copies of Machoke just because it is such an energy hog, just like its evolution, Machamp. And Machoke is a card that I just really do not like at all. But I want to include a copy of Machamp in here as well because that is Bruno's ace Pokemon. Getting 4 energy onto Machamp to attack with can be pretty rough, but if you're playing against a deck that's going to be hitting you for low damage repeatedly, like that Lorelei deck that we've already covered, then Machamp's Strike Back Pokemon power is actually going to be reflecting a lot of that damage. I was joking about Hitmonlee earlier, but it's not a completely useless card. I would put it above Machoke in this deck, especially with Stretch Kick. If you get your opponent down to where they're within 20 damage of getting knocked out, they're going to try to retreat to the bench, but they're not going to be safe from a Stretch Kick. And then 50 damage for 3 energy is not bad at all. That's a pretty good standard in base Fossil. The reason that Hitmonlee was so underused is mainly because of its HP. If it did just have that extra bump to get it to 70 HP, I think Hitmonlee probably would have been one of the better mid-game attackers, but 60 HP was just a little too easy to knock out, and it couldn't attack on its first turn like Hitmonchan. Great Haymaker Hitmonchan that could deal 20 damage for 1 energy off of a jab, much like Machop, but with higher HP. In a deck with both Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, it's actually going to be more worth the energy to load up a Hitmonlee on the bench while you're attacking with jabs turn after turn for only 1 energy off of a Hitmonchan, because later in the game, Hitmonlee is just going to be more energy efficient for a larger attack. Got 3 Veil and 2 Oak for your draw power, and this is a fighting deck, so of course I got a full playset of plus power. Got a full playset of switch as well, because of all of the high retreat cost of the Pokemon in this deck. 3 Gust of Wind to pair with those plus powers. That's where a lot of your prizes are going to come from, is those sneaky Gust of Wind knockouts. 3 copies of Pokemon Trader because of all of the different Pokemon in this deck. You want to make sure you've got the one that you need for your specific strategy and situation that you find yourself in. A couple copies of Last to try to deal with energy removal, as that's going to be very problematic when you're trying to set up a Hitmonchan, a Hitmonlee, a Machamp. Because this deck uses a lot of basic Pokemon, that's going to be prime opportunities to utilize Fuji, where if you've got an Onix that's got 8 damage counters on it, you don't want it to be Gust Bait. you just Fuji it right back into your deck and don't even worry about it. That's especially helpful for if you've got a weakened Hitmonchan or a Hitmonlee that, again, you don't want it to be gust bait sitting on your bench. You can use a Fuji, put it back in your deck. You're not losing any energy because those are going to go right back into your deck along with it. And you can redraw those cards, play them fresh to the bench with no damage counters, start loading them up again, and then filling out the rest of the deck with fighting energy because you are going to need it for those high damage attacks. Like I was saying earlier, Onix or Machop, either one, is a great way to start a match. And as you're attacking with those, as you're sponging damage with an Onix, that's when you're going to be playing your Hitmonlees and Hitmonchans to the bench. Start getting those energy loaded onto them. Hopefully by then you've been able to kind of survey what your opponent's strategy is, know what you're going to need to do mid-game to late game. Are you going to have time to search out those Machokes and Machamps? Is it going to be worth evolving into Machamp and using 4 energy? Hopefully the Onix and the Machop early game is going to draw a lot of your opponent's energy removals. That way, any that they still have in their hand late game, you can try to hit them with last while you're attaching more and more energy to your bigger Pokemon. And then you just punch and kick and deal as much damage as you can as quickly as you can. That's pretty much all fighting decks. Like most other fighting decks, the Bruno deck is pretty straightforward. You're just going to be strategically placing those plus powers to get key knockouts as fast as possible, stacking a lot of damage early game with Onix and Machop's 1 energy attacks, as well as Hitmonchan. If your opponent is getting their Pokemon to the bench safely before you can knock them out, then that's when you just whip out a Hitmonlee, start stretch kicking them for some easy knockouts without having to waste Gust of Wind. When your own Pokemon are on the bench with a bunch of damage counters on them, just use Fuji to scoop them right off the bench, shove them right back in your deck where they're safe. Deprive your opponent of those easy Gust knockouts. I really wish that Pokemon Adventures Hitmonlee was canon, where its kicks were literally spring-loaded and it could kick things from 50 feet away if it wanted to. It's much more interesting and intimidating that way. If I was going to add in another card, it would be Defender. That way, the Bruno theme deck kind of functioned the same way as the Hiker theme deck that I did, because Bruno's deck is really just a souped-up Hiker deck. Defender will allow you to sponge damage much easier. It's going to make those Onixes last longer. It's going to help your Hitmonlees out and can be a really interesting tool against other high output decks, especially for Machamp. You put a Defender on Machamp, it's taking big attacks that are dealing 40 or 50 damage. It's going to reduce that incoming damage, but since Machamp is still taking damage itself, even if it is reduced, it's going to be dealing that 10 damage back, which can add up and really set you up for revenge kills or even some stretch kick kills later on. And that's the Bruno deck. Let me know what you thought. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of people telling me I probably should have used a more Machamp in this deck since that is Bruno's ace. But I did want to keep room for Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee both, since those are just viably better than Machamp and they're more interesting to use. Stay tuned for Agatha and Lance, and have a great day. Stay safe. See you next video.